Ladies and gentlemen, today we are approaching the remarkable life of Boris Pasternak, one of the most fascinating and complex intellectuals to come out of 20th century Russia. Hearing his name, many people will have the impression that he is the author of Dr. Zhivago and a Nobel Prize winner in literature. But Pasternak was much more than just a writer. He was an unparalleled soul who lived through turbulent times of politics and art. Imagine this. A young man born into an artistic family who dreamed of becoming a musician, and who ultimately became one of the greatest poets of the 20th century, choosing to maintain his artistic integrity while confronting the establishment. Pasternak's life is like a romance written by himself. It is the story of a man's epic struggle in the face of power and his uncompromising pursuit of truth. In today's journey, we will get closer to his hidden face, his hidden passions, and his profound truths as a human being. His life is far more than a mere biography. It is a story of the power of art, the dignity of the individual, and the fortitude of the human spirit. Chapter 1. The Genealogy of an Artist, the Roots of Talent. Pasternak's talent was no accident. He was born into a family where art truly runs in the blood. His father, Leonid Pasternak, was the most respected Impressionist painter in Russia at the time. His mother, Rosalia Kaufman, was an accomplished pianist and a skilled music educator. Pasternak's birthplace was a space where art itself came to life. From an early age, painting, music, and literature intersected on a daily basis in this intellectual environment. Family conversations were always filled with art and culture. It was, in a sense, Pasternak's destiny to become an artist. Of particular interest is that he initially felt most strongly about his passion for music. As a teenager, he spent many hours in front of the keyboard, voraciously learning music theory. Scriabin, the musical master of the time, saw the talent of the young Pasternak and saw extraordinary potential. Imagine, a young man who dreamed of becoming a musician, ultimately becoming one of the leading poets of the 20th century. This transition was no mere coincidence. It was the natural choice of his inner creativity. From music to literature, from the keyboard to poetry, Pasternak's life has always been a journey of artistic exploration and transformation. Chapter 2. Intellectuals in the Revolutionary Period, Between Politics and Art. The Russian Revolution of 1917. This historical upheaval had a decisive impact on Pasternak's life. At first, like many intellectuals, he saw hope in the revolution. The possibility of social change, the dawn of a new world. Gradually, however, this hope turned into a deep disillusionment. During the Stalin era, art became an entirely political tool. Artists were subjected to strict censorship and surveillance and forced to obey the regime. Creative freedom was literally at risk of life. While many intellectuals compromised and pandered to the establishment, Pasternak was different. His poetry and literature were not direct political criticism, but deep insights into humanity. It was his most powerful form of resistance to the oppressive regime. His poems were not political slogans, but rather expressed the inner life of man, his emotions, and the cries of his soul. It was like a breath of freedom hidden behind the words. Imagine that. While most of the intellectuals around him remained silent and followed the system, Pasternak remained true to his artistic integrity. His poetry was a quiet but powerful symbol of resistance in a time of oppression. Chapter 3. Love and Complexity, Pasternak's Relationships. Pasternak's personal life was more complex and emotionally rich than his literary works. His most famous spiritual love affair was with the poet Marina Tsvetova. Their correspondence is considered a masterpiece of pure intellectual and emotional exchange. Not a physical relationship, but a resonance of the soul through words. It is truly the ultimate form of literary love. Pasternak's personal relationships, however, were always complicated. He had deep relationships with several women, each with a unique emotional depth. His relationship with his first wife, Evgenia Lubkov, was pure love in his youth. Later, his relationship with music teacher Zinaida Nygauz was more intellectual and complex. And in his later years, his most intense love affair was with the young actress Ola Ivanskaya. His love was not merely an emotional bond, but always had an intellectual and poetic depth. Imagine it. His love was expressed through words and will live on forever through his poems and letters. For Pasternak, love was not just an emotion, but a work of art itself. Chapter 4. Dr. Zhivago, A Cry of Artistic Conscience. Dr. Zhivago is one of the most important works of 20th-century Russian literature. This novel is more than just a story. It is a grand historical panorama of individual dignity, love, and suffering under the Soviet regime. Revolution, civil war, the Stalin era, these turbulent times are described in connection with personal emotions. The main character, Yuri Zhivago, is Pasternak's own alter ego. He is an idealistic doctor and poet. He is the symbol of an intellectual who lives according to his conscience without compromising the system. Interestingly, Dr. Zhivago was not initially published in the Soviet Union. Pasternak published his work in the West through the Italian publisher Junhardi. As a result, in 1958 he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, but was denounced as a traitor by his native country. The Soviet government exerted relentless pressure on him, forcing him to withdraw the prize. But Pasternak did not give in. His artistic integrity transcended political pressure. Imagine that. An artist who was condemned by his own country and socially isolated, but never bent on his artistic convictions and continued to present the truth to the world. Dr. Zhivago was not just a novel, but a symbol of the triumph of the human spirit over oppression. Chapter 5. The Artist's Legacy, Timeless Influences. Pasternak's influence extends far beyond his lifetime and into the present day. He was not just a writer, but a revolutionary thinker in 20th-century Russian culture. For many subsequent artists, Pasternak became a symbol of freedom and integrity. During the Soviet era, he constantly fought censorship and defended artistic freedom. While many writers and poets were forced into silence, Pasternak never lost his voice. His poetry was like a beacon of hope in an oppressed society. Interestingly, his influence was not limited to literature. Music, painting, theater, young artists in all fields of art took courage from Pasternak's spirit. He showed that art is not just expression, but has the power to transform society. In particular, the generation of the Russian underground cultural movement, the so-called underground literature, revered Pasternak as a spiritual pioneer. Later dissident writers such as Solzhenitsyn and Andrei Voznesensky drew direct inspiration from Pasternak's courage. His poems did not directly convey a political message, but rather reached into the depths of the human inner life, emotions, and psyche. It was his most powerful form of resistance to the oppressive regime. For example, his collection of poems, My Sister, My Life, makes a remarkably subtle connection between the inner world of the individual and the external historical reality. Through his poems, the reader is able to feel the subtle emotions of an individual living within the enormous cogs of history. In addition, Pasternak played an important role as a translator. He translated into Russian such masters of Western literature as Shakespeare, Goethe, and Shaw. His translations were not mere language replacements, but works of art that masterfully conveyed the spirit and soul of the original works. His legacy goes far beyond literary awards and publications. Pasternak became a symbol of the moral responsibility that artists have to society. He demonstrated that art is not mere entertainment or decoration, but a force for human dignity and the pursuit of truth. The spirit of Pasternak lives on in contemporary Russia. A younger generation of writers and artists revere him as a symbol of freedom and integrity and seek to carry on his spirit. Imagine that, a writer who fought against political pressure and stood by his artistic convictions. His influence continues to speak of the triumph of universal humanity over one era and one country. Boris Pasternak's life is the most glorious symbol of artistic integrity. Despite political pressure, social isolation, and personal anguish, he never wavered in his artistic convictions. His legacy goes beyond mere literary works. Pasternak is one of the leading intellectuals of the 20th century, embodying the dignity of the individual, the freedom of the arts, and a dedication to truth. His poetry continues to proclaim the triumph of the human spirit over oppression. Pasternak's life offers us an important lesson. It is that true art transcends political pressures and social syncretism, and that personal conscience and artistic integrity are the most powerful forms of resistance. Let me close with one last quote from him. To live is not to suffer meaningless agony. Living is passion, hope, and creation. How was it? If you liked this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.